February 24th, 2010, just after 1:30 p.m. SeaWorld, Orlando. The Dine with Shamu post-show session was going perfectly until it all stopped. Dawn Brancheau, 40 years old and with over 15 years of experience, was performing a routine interaction she had done countless times. The small restaurant crowd was delighted. Then, Tilikum, the 6-ton male orca she was interacting with, simply lost it. Security and tourist cameras recorded every second of what happened next. The attack unfolded over agonizing minutes, which felt like an eternity to everyone watching. By the time emergency crews could finally reach her, it was too late. What drove Tilikum to turn on one of the most experienced trainers in the world? The answer will change everything you think you know about orcas. Long before the screams echoed across the amphitheater, before blood turned the crystal-clear tank into a nightmare, there was a young American girl growing up in Indiana who was absolutely obsessed with marine life. Dawn Brancheau wasn't your typical kid. While others played with dolls and video games, she spent hours reading about whales and dolphins like they held the secrets to the universe. This wasn't some passing childhood phase that would fade with time. At age 7, Dawn was already sketching marine mammals with incredible detail. She knew their behaviors, their habitats, their scientific names before most kids could properly tie their shoes. Her bedroom looked like a marine biology lab, covered with posters of whales breaching and dolphins dancing through waves. Her family figured she'd grow out of it eventually. Kids get obsessed with things, dinosaurs, horses, space exploration, but Dawn never moved on from her fascination. Every family trip to the coast became a mission for her. She'd stand at the water's edge for hours, watching the horizon like she was waiting for something magical to appear. By 14, she was writing letters to marine parks across the country. By 18, she was studying psychology and animal behavior in college, building the foundation for what would become her life's work. When SeaWorld offered her a position, she didn't hesitate for a second. This was her dream.
SeaWorld wasn't exactly rolling out the red carpet for a young woman fresh out of college. Dawn started exactly where everyone else did. Cleaning tanks, preparing fish buckets, and doing the unglamorous work that keeps marine parks running. The pay was terrible, the hours were brutal, and the Florida heat made everything twice as difficult. But Dawn had something special that supervisors noticed immediately. She could read animals in ways that took other trainers years to develop. She understood when a dolphin was stressed before it showed obvious signs. She knew how to calm agitated sea lions with just the right tone of voice and body language. Word spread fast through the facility. Promotions came quickly. Within 2 years, she was working directly with SeaWorld's most famous resident, a massive male orca named Tilikum. The first time they met, something clicked between them. Tilikum, who had a reputation for being difficult with new trainers, seemed to respond to Dawn's calm, confident presence in remarkable ways. Their training sessions became legendary throughout the park. Dawn would arrive before sunrise, sitting quietly by the tank edge, talking to Tilikum in that gentle, steady voice that somehow cut through all the noise and chaos of the facility. The orca would glide over, his enormous bulk moving like liquid silk through the water. To anyone watching, it looked like pure magic happening right before their eyes. But there were warning signs that everyone chose to ignore. Veteran trainers whispered about Tilikum's dark history, the violent capture from Icelandic waters, the years of psychological abuse at a previous facility, the fatal incidents that were quietly buried in corporate files. They said Tilikum had never really adapted to captivity, that beneath his performance perfection lurked something wild and unpredictable. Dawn dismissed these concerns completely. She believed their bond transcended Tilikum's traumatic past.
I have a question for you. First, I would like to say that it is possible to follow the greatest curiosities of our world every day. But to do so, you need to be subscribed to our channel. So, are you already subscribed? If not, take the opportunity to subscribe now. Also, take the opportunity to like the video, so YouTube will recommend more videos from our channel. So leave your like right now. And now that you have done that, let's go!
To understand what happened on that terrible February morning, you need to know Tillicum's story. It began in 1983 in the frigid waters off Iceland. Tillicum was just 2 years old, swimming alongside his mother and family pod when the capture boats arrived like predators hunting prey into massive nets. Tillicum fought desperately, his small body thrashing against the ropes as his family scattered in absolute terror. The last thing he heard before the sedation dart hit was his mother's distress calls fading into the distance forever. When Tillicum woke up, everything he'd ever known was gone. No endless ocean, no family, no freedom, just concrete walls, artificial lighting, and the constant mechanical hum of filtration systems. For months, he refused to eat. He slammed his body against tank walls with such force that the impacts could be heard throughout the entire facility. Marine parks passed him around like damaged merchandise. Each facility promised they could rehabilitate him, but none understood that Tillicum wasn't broken. He was grieving. Orcas are among the most intelligent creatures on Earth, with complex social bonds and emotional lives that rival our own. Ripping them from their families creates psychological trauma that never fully heals. His first facility, Sealand of the Pacific, was basically a concrete nightmare. 3 orcas crammed into a tiny pool, forced to perform in conditions that would drive any intelligent creature insane. The aggression and competition were constant. In 1991, Tillicum and 2 female orcas killed a trainer there. The facility closed, but instead of recognizing the danger, SeaWorld bought Tillicum and brought him to Florida. By the time he arrived at SeaWorld, Tillicum was massive, over 22 feet long and weighing more than 12,000 pounds. The park's marketing department loved his imposing size and striking appearance. Audiences gasped when he breached, his enormous body defying gravity in spectacular displays of power. But the trainers who worked with him daily noticed things that never made it into promotional videos. Tillicum's dorsal fin had completely collapsed, a common sign of severe psychological stress in captive orcas. He had strange, repetitive behaviors, floating motionless for hours, grinding his teeth against tank edges until they were worn down to nubs. The incidents started small, but grew more frequent. A missed cue here, an aggressive tail slap there. Once, he grabbed a trainer underwater and held on just long enough to send a clear message. Each time, park management downplayed the severity. These were isolated incidents, they claimed, normal behavior for such a large animal. They were lying to themselves.
Despite Tillicum's troubled history, his partnership with Dawn seemed genuinely special. The experienced trainer had a remarkable gift for connecting with difficult animals, and Tillicum responded to her in ways that amazed veteran staff members. Their shows became SeaWorld's crown jewel, a seemingly perfect demonstration of trust and cooperation between species. Dawn would start each performance by simply standing at the tank edge, arms outstretched, calling Tillicum's name in that calm, confident voice that had become her trademark. The massive orca would rise from the depths like a submarine surfacing, his bulk creating barely a ripple. They'd maintain eye contact for long moments, human and whale locked in what appeared to be genuine communication. The routines were absolutely breathtaking. Tillicum would launch Dawn high into the air during their signature moves. She would soar through space, arms spread like wings, before diving gracefully back into his waiting embrace. Audiences lost their minds completely. Children screamed with pure delight. Adults pulled out cameras, desperate to capture what felt like magic happening right before their eyes. But magic, real or manufactured, is incredibly fragile. And there were cracks appearing in the illusion that Dawn refused to acknowledge, or maybe couldn't see. During rehearsals, Tillicum had been showing subtle signs of increasing stress and agitation. He'd hesitate before following commands, his responses slightly delayed. His breathing patterns were different. He'd position himself oddly in the tank, watching the trainer platforms with an intensity that made other staff uncomfortable. Some of the newer trainers tried to raise concerns about these changes. They'd worked with aggressive animals before and recognized the warning signs that were becoming impossible to ignore. Tillicum's body language was shifting, more rigid, less fluid, like a coiled spring under tremendous pressure. During rehearsals, he'd started displaying threatening behaviors that experienced staff knew were serious red flags. Dawn brushed off these concerns with that confident smile that had made her so popular with park management and visitors alike. "He's just having an off day," she'd say. "Tomorrow he'll be perfect again." Her absolute faith in their bond blinded her to the growing danger that was building beneath the surface. Other trainers exchanged worried glances but said nothing. SeaWorld was star performer, and questioning her methods was basically career suicide. The shows were selling out completely, merchandise was flying off shelves, and corporate executives were planning massive expansions based on the incredible success of the Dawn-Tillicum partnership. Nobody wanted to rock the boat or create problems where none seemed to exist.
February 24th, 2010 dawned bright and clear in Orlando. Perfect Florida weather, sunny skies, comfortable temperature, gentle breeze carrying the familiar scent of theme park excitement. SeaWorld was buzzing with activity as families streamed through the gates, ready for a day of marine entertainment and wonder. Behind the scenes, though, something felt different. Dawn arrived early for her usual morning session with Tillicum, but the massive Orca's behavior was noticeably strange. Instead of gliding over to greet her as he normally did, Tillicum hung back in the deeper section of his tank, moving in slow, deliberate circles that seemed almost methodical. During the morning show, Tillicum's performance was technically flawless, but emotionally flat. He hit every mark, executed every jump with precision, but there was no spark or joy in his movements. He moved like a machine following programmed commands, rather than a living creature expressing himself. His eyes, usually alert and engaged during interactions with Dawn, seemed distant and somehow cold. The show went well from the audience's perspective. Families cheered, children laughed with delight, cameras clicked constantly. Dawn performed with her usual grace and confidence, guiding Tillicum through their choreographed routines like they'd done hundreds of times before. Everything appeared normal, perfect even. But after the show ended and the crowds dispersed, something changed. Dawn decided to spend some quiet time with Tillicum, lying on her stomach at the edge of the tank in the shallow area called the slide-out. She was relaxing, talking to him in that gentle voice, her long ponytail dangling in the water as she interacted with the massive orca she trusted completely. This was their routine, quiet bonding time after the excitement of performances. Tillicum would often come over for what looked like affection, gently touching her with his rostrum or allowing her to rub his massive head. To anyone watching, it was a beautiful display of the connection between trainer and animal. But this time was different. This time, Tillicum saw something in Dawn's ponytail that triggered something primal and deadly. None of the witnesses knew they were about to see something.
The attack began without warning. Dawn was lying peacefully at the edge of Tillicum's tank, completely relaxed and trusting, when the massive orca suddenly lunged forward and grabbed her ponytail in his jaws. The movement was so quick and explosive that witnesses barely had time to process what was happening. Dawn's scream was cut short as Tillicum yanked her into the water with terrifying force. She hit the surface hard, the impact driving all air from her lungs as 6 tons of muscle dragged her down into the blue depths. Blood began clouding the crystal-clear water almost immediately. The few staff members who witnessed the initial grab stood frozen for crucial seconds, their minds struggling to process what they were seeing. This couldn't be happening. Not Dawn and Tillicum, not after years of perfect performances and apparent trust between them. But it was happening, and it was getting worse by the second. Tillicum didn't just grab Dawn and release her like he might during a training mishap. He held on, his massive jaws clamped around her body as he began what marine biologists call a death roll, the same technique crocodiles use to disorient and kill their prey. Dawn's body twisted through the water like a rag doll as Tillicum spun with her, his movements precise and deliberate. This wasn't random aggression or a training accident gone wrong. This was a 12,000-pound predator doing exactly what evolution had programmed him to do. Emergency alarms began wailing across the facility. Staff members rushed toward the tank, their training kicking in despite the horror of what they were witnessing. But there was nothing they could do except watch and hope that somehow, someway, Tillicum would remember his training and release the woman who had trusted him with her life. The attack lasted nearly 30 minutes. 30 minutes of pure nightmare that felt like hours to everyone watching. Tillicum would surface occasionally, Dawn's limp form still in his grasp, before diving back down to continue his brutal assault on the trainer who had believed they shared an unbreakable bond. When he finally released her, Dawn Brancheau was gone. The 40-year-old trainer who had dedicated her life to marine mammals floated motionless in the tank, her body bearing the unmistakable.
What followed was the longest half hour in SeaWorld's history. Unlike quick predatory kills in the wild, Tillicum seemed to be playing with his victim, holding Dawn underwater for extended periods before surfacing briefly, only to drag her down again. It was behavior that spoke to something darker than simple aggression. It was almost methodical, calculated. Each time Dawn's body appeared at the surface, hope would flicker among the horrified staff members watching from the platform. Maybe she was still alive. Maybe there was still a chance for rescue. But then, Tillicum would grab her again, his massive bulk disappearing into the depths of the tank with his victim. Emergency protocols that had been drilled countless times seemed inadequate in the face of such raw, primal violence. Staff members tried everything they could think of: nets, food distractions, emergency signals, but Tillicum ignored it all. He was completely focused on the woman in his jaws, following instincts that had been buried but never eliminated by years of captivity. The few witnesses to the attack would later describe feeling completely helpless. These were people trained to work with dangerous marine mammals, but nothing had prepared them for watching a colleague and friend being killed by an animal she'd trusted completely. The sounds alone, the thrashing water, the occasional gasp when Dawn briefly surfaced, would haunt them for years. Divers were eventually brought in, but they had to wait for Tillicum to move to a different section of the tank before they could safely enter the water. Even then, they knew they were risking their own lives. Tillicum had already killed once that morning, and there was no guarantee he wouldn't attack again. The rescue team worked frantically to recover Dawn's body, but it was clear to everyone present that they were recovering remains, not saving a life. The attack had been too brutal, too sustained, too precise. Tillicum had done what killer whales do in the wild when they're hunting. He had killed efficiently and completely. When they finally pulled Dawn from the water, the woman who had been SeaWorld's shining star just hours before was unrecognizable. Her injuries were so severe that details were never released to the public, sparing her family and colleagues from even more trauma. But the nightmare wasn't over. It was just the immediate aftermath of Dawn's death was chaos barely contained by corporate crisis management. SeaWorld went into lockdown mode, shutting down all Orca shows and restricting access to the area where the attack had occurred. Media began gathering outside the park gates like vultures, sensing a story that would dominate headlines for months. Inside the facility, staff members struggled to process what they'd witnessed. Many were in shock, unable to comprehend how their trusted colleague had been killed by an animal she'd worked with for years. The trainers who'd been closest to Dawn were devastated, questioning everything they thought they knew about the orcas in their care. Corporate executives worked frantically to control the narrative, but there was no spinning this tragedy into something manageable. A beloved trainer had been killed in the most public way possible, and the incident raised uncomfortable questions about the entire marine entertainment industry. News of Dawn's death spread rapidly across social media and traditional news outlets. The story had everything that captures public attention: a tragic victim, a dangerous predator, and an industry built on the premise that wild animals could be safely controlled for human entertainment. Within hours, it became international news. Animal rights organizations that had been protesting SeaWorld for years suddenly found their concerns validated in the most horrible way possible. PETA, the Humane Society, and other groups issued statements pointing out that this tragedy was entirely predictable given Tilikum's history and the unnatural conditions of his captivity. The family's grief was compounded by media attention and public scrutiny. Dawn's husband, Scott, and her family found themselves at the center of a global conversation about marine mammal captivity that they'd never asked to be part of. Their private loss became a public symbol of everything wrong with keeping killer whales in tanks. SeaWorld's stock price began dropping immediately as investors realized the long-term implications of the incident. This wasn't just a tragic accident. In the weeks following Dawn's death, investigative journalists began digging into SeaWorld's carefully constructed public image. What they discovered was a pattern of concealed incidents, ignored warning signs, and corporate priorities that consistently put profit over safety. Internal documents revealed that Tilikum had been involved in aggressive incidents that were never reported to regulatory authorities or disclosed to the trainers working with him. He'd shown increasing signs of psychological distress in the months leading up to the fatal attack, but these warning signs were dismissed as normal variations in behavior. The most damaging revelations involved Tilikum's previous kills. Before coming to SeaWorld, he'd been involved in the death of a trainer at Sealand of the Pacific in 1991. Then, in 1999, a man who'd stayed in the park after hours was found dead in Tilikum's tank. SeaWorld knew about both incidents, but continued using Tilikum in shows with direct human contact. Former trainers began speaking out about the culture of secrecy that surrounded Tilikum's behavior. They described incidents where he'd grabbed trainers underwater, held them longer than normal during interactions, or displayed aggressive behaviors that were quickly covered up by management. The psychological evaluation reports were particularly disturbing. Marine mammal specialists had documented clear signs of severe psychological trauma in Tilikum. Repetitive behaviors, social withdrawal, and physical deterioration that indicated an animal on the verge of a complete psychological breakdown. But perhaps most shocking was the discovery that SeaWorld's own experts had warned about the dangers of using Tilikum in waterwork with trainers. Internal emails showed discussions about his unpredictable behavior and recommendations for increased safety measures that were ignored.
The lawsuits came swift and devastating. Dawn's family, represented by aggressive wrongful death attorneys, filed massive claims against SeaWorld. They accused the company of gross negligence, arguing that management knew Tilikum was dangerous but continued to allow direct contact for financial reasons. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, launched its own investigation, ultimately finding SeaWorld and implementing new regulations that effectively ended the era of trainers performing in the water with orcas. The agency's report was scathing, documenting a pattern of safety violations and inadequate protection for employees. But the real impact was cultural. Dawn's death became a turning point in the global conversation about marine mammal captivity, especially after the documentary Blackfish brought her story to millions of viewers worldwide. The film didn't just tell the story of her death, it exposed the entire system that made such tragedies inevitable. Public opinion shifted dramatically. Families who had enjoyed SeaWorld shows for generations began questioning whether entertainment was worth the cost in animal suffering and human lives. School groups canceled field trips. Corporate sponsors pulled their support. The company that had once been synonymous with family entertainment became a symbol of exploitation and cruelty. Other marine entertainment companies, seeing the writing on the wall, began quietly phasing out their Orca programs. The era of killer whales performing for human audiences was coming to an end, driven by tragedy and a growing understanding of what captivity meant for these highly intelligent creatures.
Dawn Brancheau's death catalyzed changes that extended far beyond SeaWorld's corporate headquarters. Her tragedy became a symbol of everything wrong with keeping highly intelligent, social animals in artificial environments for human entertainment. Marine biologists who had long argued against orca captivity found their voices amplified by the horror of what had happened. Dr. Lori Marino, a leading expert in cetacean intelligence, explained to media outlets that Dawn's death was entirely predictable given what science knows about orca psychology and behavior in captivity. The incident sparked protests worldwide. In cities across America, Europe, and Asia, demonstrators gathered outside marine parks holding signs bearing Dawn's photo and demanding an end to orca captivity. The hashtag Justice for Dawn became a rallying cry for animal rights activists who had been fighting this battle for decades. Scientific research into cetacean psychology expanded rapidly as organizations sought to understand the full impact of captivity on these remarkable creatures. Studies showed that the psychological trauma of captivity affected not just behavior, but actual brain development and social functioning in orcas. The entertainment industry responded by developing new forms of marine education that didn't rely on live animal performances. Advanced animatronics, virtual reality experiences, and sanctuary-based observation programs offered alternatives that could educate the public.
Today, over a decade after Dawn's tragic death, the ripples from that February morning continue to spread across the marine entertainment industry and beyond. SeaWorld, once the undisputed king of marine theme parks, has been fundamentally transformed by the consequences of that attack. The company officially ended its orca breeding program in 2016, meaning that the current generation of captive killer whales will be the last. Shows featuring orcas have been phased out in favor of more naturalistic presentations that focus on education rather than entertainment. The days of trainers riding on the backs of killer whales are gone forever. Tilikum himself died in 2017 at the estimated age of 36, having spent 33 years in captivity. His death was attributed to bacterial pneumonia, though many experts believe that the psychological stress of captivity contributed to his deteriorating health. During his final years, he was largely kept separate from other orcas and from public view, a shadow of the massive performer who had once thrilled audiences. Dawn's family established the Dawn Brancheau Foundation, dedicated to improving conditions for marine mammals and supporting research into their psychological needs. Her husband, Scott, has become an unlikely advocate for ending orca captivity, speaking at conferences and supporting legislation that would phase out the practice entirely. The foundation has funded groundbreaking research into cetacean intelligence and emotion, helping scientists better understand the complex inner lives of these remarkable creatures. Their work has contributed to growing recognition that orcas possess cognitive abilities and emotional depths that make their captivity ethically indefensible. SeaWorld's remaining orcas live out their days in tanks that, while larger and more enriched than before, remain artificial environments that can never replicate the complexity of ocean life. Some animal welfare experts argue for their release.
Don Brancheau's death raised fundamental questions about humanity's relationship with wild animals that remain largely unanswered today. How well do we really understand the creatures we claim to have tamed? What happens when we remove highly intelligent, social animals from their natural environments and expect them to adapt to our needs? Marine biologists continue studying former captive orcas, hoping to better understand the long-term effects of confinement on these remarkable creatures. Early findings suggest that the psychological damage runs deeper than anyone previously imagined, affecting not just behavior, but actual neurological development. The debate continues, but one thing remains clear. The era of using killer whales for human entertainment is ending. But what about you? What do you think about this?
Still curious? Then don't stop now. The next mystery is already waiting for you. Just click the video on screen. I saved it just for you. See you there, curious one.